Fox News alert on a new bombshell in a growing Washington scandal as Fox News confirms that the House Judiciary Committee is now investigating whether the Attorney General of the United States lied to Congress under oath. Welcome to America Live, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. This new twist breaking in just the last hour. It involves testimony that the Attorney General gave on May 15th. During that sworn testimony, Mr. Holder told lawmakers that he had never been involved in the potential prosecution of the press for disclosure of material. That statement came just hours before reports surfaced that Mr. Holder had signed off on a warrant targeting Fox News correspondent James Rosen. Well, we didn't learn that he personally signed off on it until late last week, but now we know he did. And some are questioning whether that is grossly inconsistent with what he told Congress. He, the DOJ, tracked James's movements in and out of the State Department. They got a hold of James's personal Gmail emails. They went so far as to get the phone records of Mr. and Mrs. Rosen, his parents. And now we know that the way they did all of that, without providing any notice to James, so he'd have no opportunity to object to any of this, was by naming him as a co-conspirator and potential aider and abettor of espionage for simply doing his job. There wasn't more, it wasn't, and he disclosed it to the Russians. I mean, it was basically pure reporting activity. He sought out a source, told that source that he would like to break news ahead of his competitors on newsworthy items. That is what the FBI affidavit accused him of doing, and said that that amounted to aiding and abetting espionage. And then the Attorney General, knowing at the time, now keep in mind, Eric Holder, at the time he gives this testimony, he knows that he has personally signed off on that search warrant. We don't know that. Congress doesn't know that. But Eric Holder, when he gives this testimony on May 15th, he knows that he did it personally. He signed off on it. And now they're accusing him of lying. Watch.
I would argue that the Espionage Act of 1917 would authorize the prosecution of anyone who disclosed classified information, and perhaps that's another area that we may need to take action on here in this Congress.
With regard to the potential prosecution of the press for the disclosure of material, that is not something that I've ever been involved in, heard of, or would think would be a wise policy.
Joining me now, Chris Darwell, our Fox News digital politics editor and host of Power Play on FoxNews.com Live. Chris, good to see you. So now it's official. The House Judiciary Committee is looking into, as we have more and more calls for Eric Holder to step down, to resign, and now they're coming not just from the right, but from some on the left as well. Now we have the House Judiciary Committee saying this man may have lied to us under oath, which is a much bigger problem.
Yeah, I should say so. And beyond that, the only plausible defense that Mr. Holder can offer in this would be to say, well, I did, sort of like we've heard from Hillary Clinton and others on other unrelated issues in the Obama administration, which is say, well, I can't review everything closely. I can't pay attention to everything that I signed. There's so much. And that may be the biggest thing here, because as they try to push Holder on the issue of perjury, they may get to this all-important question here. How many, Mr. Attorney General, how many times have your lawyers named people, as they did with James Rosen, as a possible co-conspirator in an effort to snoop on them, to spy on them? How often has this happened? Holder has been very vague on this subject and non-responsive. If they have perjury as a means, as a crowbar to start to pry stuff out of him, things could get very interesting.
I've been asking that since the AP scandal broke, before the Rosen scandal broke, which is, how many of us have you spied on, and when did you do it? And why, if we weren't given notice, weren't we given notice? I mean, because it's one thing for the DOJ to go into a courtroom and try to get your records, your phone records, your email records. It is quite another for them not to give you any notice. The way our justice system works is you provide notice to the other side, even if you don't like to. It's the constitutional rights that kick in and protect us. And they got around him in this case by saying Rosen was a criminal himself. that he was a potential co-conspirator in the case, and therefore notifying him of this search would have basically busted up their investigation of Rosen. And now we have Holder, on tape, now that we know that he personally signed off on the search warrant, Chris. It raises all sorts of questions about that testimony he gave to Congress. Now, I'm not saying he may have been sitting there before Congress saying, I'm not going after Rosen. I never planned on going after Rosen. When I signed off on that search warrant, I wasn't going to go after Rosen. But that is not what they led the courts to believe when they sought that search warrant. And so it's a question of, did you lie to Congress or did you lie to the judges?
When one is embroiled in a scandal as big as this one, and this is really shaping up to be the Megillah out of what's facing, all administrations in a second term expect to have some of this stuff, but this one is now shaping up to be the Megillah. Because it gets close to the White House, it's the Attorney General, it's abuse of power, it's all of this stuff. So as this expands, we'll expect to hear from Holder as, oh, we're moving on and we're going to put safeguards into place. But you can't outrun stuff like this until you've answered the question that you, Counselor, rightly identify, which is how many, how often, give us the details, tell us why. And until they do that, we won't know how big and how bad this is going to be.
Do we have the NPR sound? I asked for the NPR sound. Tucker, do we have it? I'm just waiting for my ear. Yeah, we got it. Okay, so listen to what Eric Holder said to NPR when he was asked that question. How many? How often? Right after the AP scandal broke, but before the Rosen scandal broke. Watch.
I'm not sure how many of those cases that I have actually signed off on. I take them very seriously. I know that I have refused to sign a few, pushed a few back for modifications.
I take them very seriously. And so he wants us to believe that this is a big deal at the Department of Justice. And I had Michael Mukasey on the program last week, the former Attorney General, who said these are a big deal. And I had Andrew McCarthy, former DOJ prosecutor, who put in jail the blind sheikh who bombed us on the first World Trade Center bombings. And he said, trust me when I tell you, when you go after reporters' emails or reporters' phone records, it is a big deal. It's not one of those, oh, it's no problem, just sign off on it. So I take him at his word that it is a big deal. So now how can he turn around and say, all right, I signed off on the Rosen thing, but I didn't really remember that when I was talking to Congress and telling them that I'd never been involved in potential criminal prosecution of a reporter. Again, it could be that he never planned to prosecute Rosen, okay? But then why, Chris, why did the U.S. Attorney for D.C. go into court when trying to keep the whole thing secret and argue, and this is a quote from the brief, some investigations, this is why they wanted to keep the investigation open for years on Rosen's email account. Some investigations are continued for many years because while the evidence is not yet sufficient to bring charges, it is sufficient to have identified criminal subjects and or criminal activity serious enough to justify continuation of the investigation. This guy was telling the judge they needed to keep monitoring because a crime could be charged. A crime could be charged. And so there's a real question about whether Holder gets out of this by saying, it wasn't me, I didn't know. You just said you take these things very seriously.
He's gonna have to go. He probably should have gone during that time in between the re-election and the inauguration. He was already dragging a lot around behind him. He's going to have to go eventually. Question is, how does he get out of there in a way that does not make the scandal worse? Can he sort of consume everything that's in this, take responsibility for it before a new Attorney General comes in? But every day that he's in there and these questions go unanswered, it doesn't matter how much charm offensive he does. It doesn't matter how much he nuzzles reporters and goes around and says, well, it's complicated. Until the questions are answered and until there's not just transparency but also accountability, this is not going to go away, and it's going to get worse for this administration.
There's still a lot of questions here that we're going to get to in this show, including, number one, whether he will be found to have lied before Congress. Number two, whether he should be forced to step down. Number three, whether this charm offensive, as you put it, is going to have any impact, because he gave this, basically they spoke to the Daily Beast in an article that is entitled Holder's Regrets and Repairs. And they go on about how the gravity of the situation didn't really fully sink in until the Washington Post story on Rosen broke, and now he's feeling a creeping sense of personal remorse, and so on and so forth. Well, where was that remorse when you were going after Mr. or Mrs. Rosen? Not to mention James and so on. So we're going to talk about all of this as we proceed through the show. Chris Steyerwalt, thank you. And by the way, we'll also ask whether Eric Holder really, I mean, now knowing what we know, can he investigate himself? He's the one who's supposed to be reviewing this now, per President Obama. He's going to meet with the reporters. How? How can he do that objectively in wake of these facts? Coming up.